You want to fund people like that. And it took Amplitude, I think, a year and a half after YC to find the idea. But once they did, obviously, it like really took off.
Yes.
And so there's almost like a sort of like an obstinance about like the best founders where they're just, whatever they're working on, they don't do it at like 60 or 70 or even 80%. Yes. They're always just like 100% like committed and have high conviction in what they're doing.
Yes.
And then they just need to get in the right direction and they're like basically unstoppable.
Yes. Yeah. It's a good reminder that some of these founders came into YC with like actually objectively bad ideas, right? Like there were the Brex founders who I think were working on like a VR startup at the time.
Yeah.
The Segment founders, I think when they did YC, they were working on like an ed tech.
Segment's a really another great example. Like Segment ultimately was bought by Twilio for like $3 billion. And they also went to like developer tools and API services. They applied to YC with this idea. It was to let professors who were giving a lecture like poll their students, and like no one wanted this. Like it had zero traction. And we like, again, we pushed them like, you guys are really smart, you're great engineers, why don't you work on something that's like technically hard versus this like very obviously student idea? And they were just obstinate, like, but they weren't like obstinate without direction. They were like, what we are really passionate about is fixing education, and we think this is a really good place to start, and like we're inspired to work on this mission of fixing education. And so we were like, okay, like again, they have this intensity and they have this like thing that they're really committed to, and eventually again they figured it out with the Segment idea, but it took them a while. This is what happens when you have that like obstinance. Like if you're in the wrong direction, you can like get dug into it for a while,
even longer.
Even longer, right? Like, but that's like maybe that's like the yin and yang of it. Like, because if you're only ever doing things like 60% of the time, like you then just risk like always kind of being in a 60% state.
You may be seeing a pattern here. The key attributes that come up time and again are grit and determination. If you give 100%, then you increase your chances of being in the right place at the right time for things to take off, even if it's not your first, second, or even third idea. Next up, we've got Brad and Nicola talking about how many of the top founders were clear and concise with their pitches from day one.
One company that comes to mind that I had the good fortune to interview that has gone on to be pretty successful is a company called Jeeves. They are a digital bank for startups based outside the US. And when we interviewed them, it was two founders with pretty much the exact idea that they have now, which is pretty impressive. But it was really an idea and a lot of homework, but not much actual action just yet.
So how did they convince you? I mean, were you impressed by them? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, so I went back, reread the application the other day, and the one thing that jumped out to me from the application itself was that it was very clearly written. The language was very plain and simple in the application, and it was also pretty succinct. So we have a question in the application about how much progress have you made so far? And I think they literally just had two sentences. We've completed a deal with our first bank partner and are ready to start onboarding initial customers. That was it. Now, in my mind, reading that, that's the answer. Okay, great. That's what they've done so far. And it's very easy, though, for founders that are applying to YC to just do like paragraph after paragraph. First I did this, then I did this, then I did, right. Get into pitch mode. And so looking back at that, I immediately, that jumped out to me. That would jump out to me today. Someone just very confidently and succinctly saying, this is the most noteworthy part of what I've done.
Makes sense. But that's the application. How about the interview itself?
It's interesting because they came in and they were well-spoken. We got what they were working on. It all came across very clearly, but they were also pretty upfront about things that they did know and didn't know. And they didn't try to like razzle dazzle us with like fake traction or anything like that. It was pretty clear that they didn't know yet what the actual usage was going to look like or what the demand was going to look like. They had a few early customers they were excited about that they'd signed up maybe since applying, but before the interview. But there were many question marks.